Hi, I'm Pastor Linda Glantz, and I've teamed up with my colleague and friend, Pastor Ron Palmer, for a series of 6 podcasts for the season of Lent. It follows along with our sermon series, The Apostle Peter and Me, where we talk about the Apostle Peter and the ups and downs of Peter's faith as he came to become a disciple of Jesus. So I'm glad you could join us today, and I hope that our conversation is meaningful for you. So let's get started.
Well, hey, Ron, welcome back again.
It's great to be back with you again and having a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, we're continuing this story of Peter and his ups and downs in his faith story. And we were talking about what we were going to do this week and looking at Peter's denial and what maybe led up to that and how it eventually got resolved. I think it's kind of an interesting story that we should really take a look at today. And I thought we'd start, as I was going through this, discovering that maybe we ought to go back all the way to Judas.
Yeah.
And Jesus at the Last Supper, because I think that's really the beginning of our story about Peter. So all the disciples are sitting there at the Last Supper, and Jesus predicts the betrayal of Judas and also the betrayal of Peter right then and there. So let's give Judas a shout out here. Why do you think Judas really wanted to betray Jesus?
Jesus wasn't who Judas wanted him to be. I think you coined that phrase, and that was like a could have had a V8 moment. It was like taking a look at things. And once again, when we go back to the historicity of and the political climate, what was happening, Judas was very much an insurrectionist, was very much wanting to rise up against this Roman oppression. And this is a kind of a twofold thing, that Judas was riding the coattails of this king. People were wanting Jesus to take over, and then all at once they're having the conversation, and Jesus is saying, "No, I have to go to Jerusalem and die." Well, yeah. Judas's mind has got to be spinning, and then he's going back and thinking about when Mary poured that whole year's worth of perfume on Jesus, and he went crazy over that.
Well, he was really all about the money, right?
Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, Judas has in his mind early on and up until probably close to this point, that in this new kingdom, the position, he's going to be the treasurer. He's going to handle all the money.
Yeah.
So there's a certain modicum of idolatry of the dollar there that is being blasted right out of the water, because Jesus is going to die. And I think that Judas has said, "I'm done. I wash my hands."
Sure, because he had really pinned all his hopes on this so-called Messiah. In his eyes, was completely different than what Jesus was telling them who he was going to be. And so he turned out to be quite a disappointment to Jesus.
Yeah.
Ultimately to his own undoing, but yeah. Mm-hmm. So at that same meal, though, Jesus had predicted this about Judas. He also predicted the same thing about Peter. He didn't get into specifics about how this denial was going to take place, but he did say, I think it was verse 31 in Matthew 26, this very night you will all fall away on account of me.
Yep.
This very night. If I were one of those disciples sitting at that table, I can't imagine how I would have felt after 3 years of being with this person and knowing what he said was going to happen. Mm-hmm. How would you? Yet we do it all the time.
Right.
We who have that relationship with Jesus, we still do those things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's hard for us to swallow. We don't want to believe that we actually do deny Jesus in our own lives. all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important, as we brought up in the last series, in the last recording that we had there, that Peter needed to keep his eyes directly on Jesus to not sink. We
Yes.
need to keep our eyes directly on Jesus and our hearts in the Word, so that we can maintain some semblance of stability. And this truly is like a reconciliation of the continuity in our lives. This time of Lent, this time that we're looking at things, how can we be more consistent? And I think that's a question that we need to be constantly asking ourselves.
Yeah. And, although Peter is he just can't believe that he could possibly, do something so horrible. Um, Jesus tells him what's going to happen. He said, I tell you the truth, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.
Yeah.
And Peter is like, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
And of course, the other disciples, they agree with Peter. We'd never do anything like that. And I think that's how we see ourselves too. We don't think that we would ever do anything so horrible as to actually deny Jesus.
Mhm.
But when we lose our focus, and when we let other things, money, relationships, anything, they could be stupid collectibles that keep our attention focused on something other than our relationship with Jesus, that becomes
Absolutely.
an idol. And then because of that idolatry, you are, in a sense, denying Jesus.
Mhm. Or another person.
Or another person.
I mean, I see that a lot. People come into a relationship, and all of a sudden, it's that person replaces
Yeah.
the sincerity in a person's walk, and it's happened to me. I mean, it's a situation that there are so many things that can pull our eyes off from Christ. So it's important that we maintain that relationship with Christ and in the Word and with each other, as a church family, if you will,
Right.
or a family of believers, to maintain that strength.
Okay, so we're done with the Lord's Supper, and they all go into the garden, and Jesus goes off to pray. And Judas takes off, right? And he goes and summons bringing the big guns in. And
Well, and a point to make here before that's a perfect, I believe it was in the Gospel of John, in that account, it said, at that time Satan entered him.
yeah.
Now, we're told all the way back in Genesis, when Cain killed Abel, Cain was warned and was told, sin is crouching at your door. So I think it's for us to understand that some of these glitz and glamour, the money, whatever it is, that is there to distract us, that isn't, it's not necessarily, that's not a sin. The temptation isn't the sin. It's when we resign ourselves
And act
to
on it.
carrying out. There's a difference between conviction and condemnation. And at this point, Scripture was really clear. Satan entered him. My heart hurt at that point when I read that.
Peter responds completely differently. He's
Yes.
so, I am not going to deny Jesus. No way, no how. This isn't going to happen. And so the next scene that we have in the garden is the soldiers come to arrest Jesus. And what does Peter do?
Pulls the sword.
Pulls the sword. Absolutely right. Pulls the sword. And he's going to defend him no matter what. And I'm not sure, you can overthink that maybe a little bit. So what was going through his mind? I'm going to prove to Jesus that I would never deny him. Let's prove it.
Yep.
And Jesus responds totally, we Christianity, my mission here is not about violence. So put away your sword.
If you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So he had to be kind of confused by all this. He's ready to defend who he believes in, and then when he's defending, kind of says, "Excuse me, go away, because this is not how we behave."
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it's a self-righteousness in Peter at this point. And oftentimes, I think we, in our own self-righteousness, need to be rebuked by Jesus sometimes. Put away your sword, because automatically when somebody doesn't agree with us, or we think differently, or we perceive it's in our polarity in the nation, it's in our racism, it's in all this kind of stuff, is really not that much different. And then we try to defend ourselves. I'm not sure we were all going there with this, Ron, but that's why we have these conversations.
But no, that segue, that's perfect, because when you do correlate things throughout history, humanity and humankind is the same, taken by certain expectations, I can't help but think the disciples were still kicking around in the back of their mind that this whole new kingdom was still going to happen.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, when you have the militia or you have the guards coming, that would certainly feed into the thought process of an insurrection. And an insurrection is taking over the kingdom. So
right. So if we go into the book of John, chapter 18, where we're actually talking about Peter's actual denial, now that Jesus has been taken away, right? And there's Peter, and imagine him standing outside while Jesus is being questioned before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, right? And they're giving out all the fake news. Isn't that what you called it? At one of our other conversations, the fake news thing is going out there. And with the soldiers and everything, and it's got to look to Peter like an insurrection. He's got to be petrified of all this. He's got to be afraid. And when fear takes over, how do we respond? Those endorphins kick in to protect ourselves, right? That's what happens. Whenever fear raises its head, we want to protect. And so I really, I don't want to be too hard on Peter by saying, well, you denied this guy, but I can understand why he reacted the way he did. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I'm saying, can you understand that that's how people respond?
Well, once again, when we take a look at this and we're in a tight situation, so a lot of times we can justify in our own minds, I just got to get by this next 10 minutes. I just got to get by this particular instance, and whatever I have to do to get out of it, at this point, whether it's denying Christ or denying that you did something in a process at work that went bad, that failed. No, I don't know what you're talking about. And then you move on and you deal with it later on. I think that this is a pushing, I don't know, it'd be kick the bucket down the road, however you want to look at it. We're a justifying humanity to get us out of an uncomfortable situation. And I think this is what we're looking at here.
Absolutely. And then, following this incident of Peter's denial, of course, we go through the story of the crucifixion, and then on to the resurrection, which is, the amazing part of the story. And I'm trying to think of Peter through all this, the guilt that he would have carried through all that time, including the resurrection. When Mary comes to the disciples, after being at the tomb and says, Peter, he's alive. He's alive. After what he's done and the guilt that he's carrying around,
Right.
I can't imagine what this guy has been going through all this time. But first of all, they weren't expecting really for him to rise from the dead. They
Yeah.
really weren't.
Mhm.
You know, when he appeared in the room with the disciples, and they weren't expecting that. They were shocked.
Yep. Well, that whole there was a thing that grips your heart when the rooster crowed after
Yeah.
the third time. Scripture says he went out and wept bitterly. You know, he didn't go out and just kick rocks and say, man, I goofed up this time. He wept bitterly. And this carried right on through those 3 days, you know, that time period that I've failed. I'm such a failure.
Yeah.
And it had to just tear him apart, especially thinking back of the last 3 years and the time that he spent with Jesus and the love that he saw in Jesus' eyes on a number of occasions. That whole wept bitterly concept just hits home.
Not only that, but even going through the experience of having watched him being whipped and beaten,
Uh-huh.
and just being so unable to do nothing about it.
Uh-huh. Yep. How many times have we been in that situation? How many times have we been in situations that there's just nothing that we can do about it? And how, you know, as time goes on, new things pop up, new ideas and new perspectives, and they pop up so that we can deal with it. As it just so happens, this was a scenario that was fantastic. There wasn't anyone that would have, as you said, anticipated a resurrection.
No one.
Mhm.
Well, that's a story for another time, Ron.
It is.
Talking
It
about
is.
that. Yeah. So we've gotten the opportunity to really talk through what it was like for Peter to really go through this denial and how it must have felt. But the next part of the story, we learn a little bit about what happened to him after that. And so we're going to save that for our next episode.
Excellent.
Okay. Ron, it's been fun as always. You
All
make
right.
me think about things I hadn't thought about, and hopefully I can do the same for you.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet. We'll see you
Okay.
next time around.
All right. Bye.
Bye for now.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining with Pastor Ron and me this week for our podcast. I hope it inspired you to consider where you are in your faith journey, with the understanding that the story of the Apostle Peter is oftentimes very much like our own story. And I hope you'll tune in next week for the next podcast in this series, right through the season of Lent. I hope you will also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our Disciples First YouTube channel, or even visit us on our website at disciplesfirst.com. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.